We're here to talk about the new human resources. And from talking to you guys before this, I mean, one thing that's quite clear is that the role of the Chief Human Resources Officer was evolving well before the pandemic. You guys both know that. But like the workplace itself, COVID accelerated a lot of the changes that were already happening while placing a lot of new burdens on your function, whether it was the abrupt shift to remote work, the racial reckoning post-George Floyd, the plight of frontline workers around the world, employee burnout, mental health, the battle over vaccine mandates, and now, of course, the so-called Great Resignation. I mean, HR has been through a lot the past 2 years. And one HR chief told me not long ago, we didn't sign up for this, which was quite telling. So while it's not at all new that HR, of course, has the proverbial seat at the table, any good company will do that. What perhaps is new is that all eyes at that table seem to now be looking to you guys, to HR, for answers at a time when really all we have are questions. So how have you dealt with that? I mean, let's maybe start with Jennifer, and then Sean, you can chime in.
Well, it has been, and I think Sean and I probably share this, it's been a really challenging time, at the same time rewarding in many ways, because one of the things, I think what's important to recognize is prior to the pandemic, I think the function of HR, the role of the CHRO had been evolving pretty dramatically because of the focus, quite frankly, on ESG and the social part of ESG. And I think management teams and board of directors, and in fact shareholders, understand that a critical component of the sustainability of any company are their employees, the diversity of the workforce, the culture that's being enabled and strengthened. And so I would say that has placed, prior to the pandemic, a more strategic prominence on the function of HR, which served us well as we went into the pandemic. However, once we got into the pandemic, I would say you were doing one part. I mean, it was a big logistical undertaking, right? All of a sudden, and keep in mind, half of our workforce, a lot didn't change for them. They're in manufacturing facilities. We're a part of the critical global food supply chain, end to end. And so we had to keep them motivated, engaged. There was a tremendous strain on them, while we also managed the folks in our offices who we were able to enable remote work for. But it was, it was a challenging time because of the ironic that I say this here, but because of the media environment and a lot of the information that's out there about the pandemic, we also needed to make a commitment in doubling down on being that one source of the truth for our colleagues on how science was evolving. We are a science-based company, ADM is, and we needed to stay in front of them on, let us help you sort through what you're reading about in terms of this pandemic, in terms of how to stay healthy, in terms of the efficacy of the vaccinations. Yeah. So it felt like a very different kind of role, because all of a sudden what was on display was more open dialogue about health and concerns, both physical because of the pandemic and mental, because of the strain it was placing on so many.
Gotcha. Sean, what would you add there?
First, I'm just delighted to see other human beings in this community. So I just couldn't resist saying that. It's interesting for me. I remember about 30 years ago when I began working at Merrill, and I was trying to sort of navigate what kind of career I would have. I said, well, I'm an international relations major. I minored in English. I feel that I have a decent sense of EQ. I'll pick HR, right? I don't have to be a scientist. I don't have to think about molecular biology or being an epidemiologist or a viral immunologist. And lo and behold, in the midst of the pandemic, as you noted, Jennifer, HR practitioners had to shift pretty quickly because the reliance was on us, so to speak, in terms of navigating the pandemic, making decisions about working remotely, making decisions about whether or not employees should be vaccinated, making decisions around testing. And I would say to the, respectfully, the colleague that mentioned to you, we didn't sign up for this. I would say we kind of did sign up for this, right? That's just sort of the...
it's a job.
It's just the nature of it. And right as we were in the middle of the pandemic in the spring of 2020, then we had to deal with that S part of the ESG with respect to George Floyd's murder. So then we had to quickly sort of pivot, and how do we create and engender an environment for our employees remotely, virtually, to talk openly about their feelings. And that was probably one of the first times, certainly I can recall in my career, where companies were playing a real prominent role in having these kinds of discussions. And then just when we thought things were getting boring, we have the Great Resignation. So I would say it's been, I think of it as a wonderful 2 years in a sense, because it has given the HR practice an opportunity to pivot, to enhance the degree to which we're providing strategic relevance to the business. So it's been exciting from my perspective.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Sean, but I also think one thing that I'd love to maintain and keep alive as we're reaching a different phase of this is it was a situation where you had to say, what's going on now? And it varied so dramatically. ADM's a very global company. It varied so dramatically, region by region, country by country. What do we know now? What do we need to pivot? And how do we best inform our employees about what the focus should be now? And how do we make sure we're keeping in front of them the information that they need to make informed decisions, to keep themselves healthy, to keep their families healthy, and to be able to continue to thrive inside and out of work. So one thing I'd love to keep alive is that you want to maintain that focus as an HR team where, what do we know now? How do we need to adjust and pivot? Because our profession sometimes gets very policy and rules oriented. And sometimes there's a need for that, and there's always a need for that. But there are times when we need to relax those things and understand that circumstances have changed. We now know more than we once did. And how do we need to pivot our support to this organization in light of that?
Yeah, I mean, one way you're pivoting, you mentioned ESG. There's also the G part of ESG. And we did a story not long ago about how the number of corporate directors with specific HR skills has more than doubled during the pandemic. So rather than boards just grabbing another lawyer or another former CFO, they are looking for people who have led workforces like the two of you. And I'm sure you would agree this is the long overdue shift. But talk to me about what CHROs, chief people officers, people who have really led global workforces, what can you bring to the table as a board of director of a listed company?
Well, that's a great question. I would say that a sense and a depth of understanding related to the way in which investment in the development of people enables the kind of culture to propel your growth strategy as an organization. And so with what Sean and I do and have done for a long time in our careers, you've over the years developed a depth of understanding on how you develop programs and approaches to strengthening diversity, equity, and inclusion, developing talent so that there's an accountability around the climate that we are creating so that helps us thrive, and it actually helps us improve our business and strengthen our ability to compete in the marketplace. So that's one. Quite frankly, leadership transitions, as you think about executive succession, and making sure that that those are healthy, that you're thinking about the complement of leadership talent that you have across the organization, and that's a moving target, and it's a moving target by design because companies are constantly evolving and changing and figuring out what their growth profile needs to be in the future in their portfolio businesses, and the talent of the leaders in place has to match and enable that. And so I would say those are some of the things that come to mind.
Yeah, I piggyback on your great comments, Jennifer. Peter Drucker 60 years ago said that culture eats strategy for lunch, breakfast, brunch.
Yeah.
He actually
Yes.
just said breakfast, but I'm adding
Yeah.
the other two. So when you think about your question around the virtue and value of an HR practitioner at a board level, is just reminding and this acute focus around culture. If you think about employee engagement is one of the biggest drivers to a company's success, then what are the drivers to employee engagement? And especially in this environment of the Great Resignation, which I think in some respects is being overdone, so to speak, but keeping a focus that what matters the most to any company's success are its intellectual assets. How are those assets recruited? How are they developed? How are they cultivated? How are they promoted? How do you think about career mobility? How do you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all of the above?
Yeah. What new things are you guys doing on career mobility? I think that's such a key topic. We talk so much about, oh, what are we doing to recruit people and signing bonuses and the like, but if they don't see a path for them inside the organization, they're gone. So what's new, and what can you try that perhaps you haven't tried before in terms on the retention side of things?
Yeah, well, I think those are two questions. So one on retention, it's more than career mobility. It's really about what kind of associate experience, but specifically with respect to the question around mobility, one of the things we did for the first time in the last 2 or 3 years is measure it. We received feedback from associates in a survey that we conducted about 4 years ago, and one of our lowest scores was around career mobility, and especially at the lower to middle ranks. And we decided to double down. Not only are we measuring it, but it's also a metric that drives our corporate scorecard, which drives the variable compensation bonus pools. So we are and each leader is being measured against that metric. So we're being very, very purposeful around career mobility.
Okay. And Jennifer, what's new at ADM?
So, I would say what we're focused on in terms of both attraction and retention is making sure that we're meeting our colleagues where they are. In terms of what their needs are that are unique to them at that stage in their particular life, right? And so because sometimes it isn't about mobility, it's about I want to play a role and I want to have an impact, and I want to make sure I'm working for a company that allows me to do that while I can also kind of live my best life in terms of the things I'm trying to balance at home. And so I think that one of the things that we're focused on improving is how do we do that and how do we enable that. We're doing all kinds of things in an intensely competitive labor market to attract, but I think that those are all important. But if we can make sure that we're exceptionally focused on the retention aspects of that, the other thing I think that is important is for some of our employees is making sure. To Sean's point, that they do understand the potential paths that are available at a global enterprise like ADM, because they're numerous, right? And they understand how they can navigate those things as they continue to grow and develop at the company.
You mentioned your colleagues, Jennifer. You might still be getting to know some of your colleagues because, like many people, you changed jobs during the pandemic. And while Sean, your company sort of found a new CEO. So change is constant at both of your companies. I mean, Jennifer, what was it like for you working with brand new colleagues, some of whom you maybe had never met in person, and then also having to hire and build out an HR team at a time when HR job postings are soaring? They're among the top 3 on LinkedIn. I've seen fairly recently, and there's a lot of one big reason is a lot of turnover in that function as well. So how have you handled that?
Well, first of all, I have great empathy for all employees across our organization and all organizations who start in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, on the one hand, I would be sitting there some days looking at my new colleagues from here up on a screen thinking, oh my goodness, this is hard. And then on the other hand, I said, okay, but this is good for me because it's giving me empathy for what it's feeling like for our new employees who are feeling I need to feel connected, and I want to develop relationships, and I want to develop trusting relationships, and yet there's a limitation on getting out and about to do so. And so I think that that's one thing. What was the second part of your question on that?
Oh, just in terms of, I believe, just sort of, building a team.
Oh yeah, building a team. Yeah, it is.
At a time when HR jobs are,
yeah,
a lot of
well,
turnover.
and I think that what has happened is HR professionals who bring to the table some of the characteristics that we've been describing are in high demand, right? And so we are seeing greater turnover in the function. We're seeing recruiters in high demand as well.
Yes.
Because anytime when you're operating in a labor market like this, really outstanding recruiters who understand the science of sourcing and everything are in high demand as well. And so we're doing some of the very same things. We need to, I think one of the things that's really, really important, and it's always been important, but again, it's got a greater prominence now, is making sure that when you're bringing people on board and with your own employees, you're connecting them in a very direct way to the purpose of the organization and the role that they play within it, okay? And we can't underestimate how important that is, because we've got a really noble purpose, unlocking nature to enrich lives, making sure that you're connecting every individual across the organization and helping hold managers accountable for doing so is an important part of retention as well, right?
And Sean, as sort of the keeper of the culture there at TIAA, when you have a new CEO come in, how does that force you to, shift, pivot, adjust, or, how did you adapt there?
Well, I don't know about the keeper. That's an audacious proclamation. But certainly I think of myself as a steward of it. But to Shonda Brown Duckett, our CEO, who joined us in May of 2020, she was one of about 3,000 employees that were hired from March of 2020 to March of 2022. So about 17 or 18% of our workforce were hired during this period. In fact, just this past Monday was our first day of inviting on a voluntary basis associates back into the office, and we took a view similar to some, but perhaps unlike others, which is we believe fervently that the hybrid approach, which is a combination of working in the office and working remotely, is the best approach for us, not casting aspersions on anyone doing it differently. The notion after the pandemic that one has to be in the office 5 days a week is just untenable. Yeah. Associates are demanding, rightfully I believe, radical flexibility. I also feel, and this might be an unpopular point of view, that the notion that you can work remotely for the rest of your lives and never have any interaction at all with another colleague, I think that's also difficult as well. And when we think about the rise of mental health issues, particularly among school-age children and students that are matriculating in college, when you think about the increase in crime, when you think about spousal abuse, when you think about the disproportionate impact it's had on women, you can't think about that clinically and then at the same time say it's okay never to see another human being in a work environment. So we feel very strongly that this approach of the combination of both is the best approach for us.
What surprised you most as the employees, sort of the ones who did trickle back into the office the other week?
Not surprising, but what was pleasing was just the abject excitement of just seeing people that they've only seen in a Zoom for the past 2 years. And although as an HR practitioner, we don't advise on hugging in the workplace, we suspended that practice on Monday. There was just a tremendous amount of excitement of just being able to see colleagues and go to lunch with colleagues and pop by somebody's office or cubicle,
Yeah.
and you can just see it. And that sort of validates for us that there is just this need to have
Yeah.
the balance of
Absolutely.
both.
How are you guys staying balanced? Oh, sorry, Jennifer, if you wanted to address that RTO question.
Well, I think that one of the things that, just one point on that to build upon, is we do feel strongly that it's important that you're intentional about the interactions and the time together in the office. In a real cross-functional way, location by location, site by site, so that you're maximizing the time that you do have together while enabling flexibility to work remote on some days. And so that's been one of the things that has been an evolution for us as we've tried different things and learned. Because it's really important, because when you think about the building of cultures and the developing of relationships and the fostering of trust and things like that, innovation is very important to us. Some of that happens in the informal day in and day out in-person interactions. And so how do you both enable that while you balance that with the need to allow for some flexibility, right?
Yeah. And how are you guys sort of staying, balanced? How are you guys keeping your head above water? I mean, which of you got a pandemic pooch? Who's on the Peloton 2 hours a day? What are you guys doing to sort of, yeah, there we go.
I'm on Peloton? We can ride together now. That's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
When you're building in time during your remote day for your own personal time, any new hobbies, habits?
For me, podcasts. Prior to the pandemic, I commute from central New Jersey to New York, and sort of, sports radio or other things, and just now being aware of podcasts. I'm now a podcast fanatic, probably.
Yeah.
We have one called Out of Office that I would highly recommend. You may hear a familiar voice.
I subscribe to that.
A shameless plug. A shameless
plug alert,
shameless
sorry.
plug.
And Jennifer?
Yeah. I would say exercise. I would say time with we have 3 adult children, time with them. I think one of the blessings in disguise was we had an opportunity to all regroup and reset with each other. We were forced to do so because of the pandemic. I think we all learned a lot from that. And then for me, reading is a way for me to turn my wheels off on the things that are challenging aspects of the role, and learn different perspectives and learn global perspectives. And so those are some of the few.
And just finally, Jennifer, I know people might be thinking about your own employees in the Ukraine. Can you briefly address how you're dealing with that population?
Sure. Yeah. We have 630 employees in Ukraine, and it's been rough watching this play out. And I would say what we did immediately, and we can talk a lot about the building of culture and what goes into building of culture, and then you get an opportunity to see the company actually living it and the people in the company living it, and in particular, so proud of the people on the ground. We immediately ceased our operations the day that the bombings occurred, because we placed a focus on getting on the safety of our people and everything that we needed to do to enable that for them, however they define that, right? So some of it, they're close in our thoughts every day, and we've been taking a number of different measures and actions to make sure that we're facilitating them getting to safety, whether it's inside the country or outside of the country.